Welcome to Nature Revisited, a podcast that explores our relationship with the natural world. It consists of interviews, stories, and discussions that highlight the notion that nature is not a place one goes to, but rather a place one is already a part of, that we are nature. I am joined on this episode by Eiren Caffall, author of the Mourner's Bestiary. Eiren is a writer and musician whose writing has focused on loss and nature, oceans, and extinction. In 2023, she received the Whiting Award in Creative Nonfiction and a Social Justice News Nexus Fellowship, as well as a residency at the Banff Center. The Mourner's Bestiary is a memoir that draws parallels between the body's experience of chronic disease, in Eiren's case, kidney disease, PKD, and our marine ecosystems. Along with sharing her incredible story, Eiren shares a passage from the book and a wonderful sample from her music, The Storm. Eiren joins me from her home in Chicago, along the shores of Lake Michigan. So Eiren, welcome to Nature Revisited.
Thank you so much. It's so lovely to be here.
It's a pleasure having you on the podcast. I have really been looking forward to our conversation today for quite some time. So let's start at the beginning. What is the Caffall curse, and what is some of its history?
Yeah. The Caffall curse is the name that my family gave to the disease that we inherited through a long line of genetics that goes back 150 years. My ancestors had what's called polycystic kidney disease, PKD. It was probably a spontaneous mutation sometime about 150 years ago that resulted in my great-great-grandfather, great-grandfather, grandfather, father, and I all sharing the genetics produce polycystic kidney disease. And polycystic kidney disease is a very common genetic illness. Actually, it's one of the most common genetic illnesses on planet Earth. About 12 million of us, give or take, who share the disease. It causes fluid-filled cysts to begin to build up in one's kidneys until the kidneys enlarge, and eventually people lose kidney function and have to go on dialysis or receive kidney transplants. And in my family, up until my father's generation, died by the age of 50 from the disease. So it was a repeating cycle of parents dying young, children growing up with poverty or having to stop schooling in order to take care of the family, and then inheriting the disease themselves and then passing it on to their children. By the time my father's generation, he had 3 siblings, and out of the 4 of them, 3 had polycystic kidney disease. They started referring to it the Caffall curse.
So why did you choose the title of your book, The Mourner's Bestiary? And what is a bestiary?
I feel like I came up with the title before I even knew exactly how to write the book. I was obsessed with medieval literature as a young person. My aunt is a medievalist, and I found them a really fascinating way to understand how people formed relationships with animals during history that wasn't my own. I knew that I wanted to write a book about ecosystems that I loved that were falling apart and the animals that were in them. Animals have always been an obsession for me. I was one of those kids who put pictures from Ranger Rick up on the walls and donated to Greenpeace. When I was trying to think about how to write the story of the ecosystems that I loved the most, which are almost all on the Atlantic Ocean, I really wanted to tell the stories of the animals, and it just clicked into place. Oh, I want to write a bestiary. And the Mourner part was both because I think at this stage in eco-collapse, we all are in this state of permanent mourning that we're maybe not even aware of anymore. the losses of habitat and creatures in the natural world. And also for my own story, I experienced an enormous amount of loss before I was fully an adult because of my father's family disease. And so I realized that I had this special relationship with mourning because of how I had grown up that really made me feel like I had some things to investigate about what that mourning was like for me personally and also what it's like for us collectively. So the title came way before I knew exactly how to do that in book form.
When did you first realize that nature, and in particular the ocean, had this very strong connection, that your illness was the planet's illness?
I was really lucky to grow up being able to have access to the Atlantic Ocean with my family. And I was also really lucky to grow up with a mom who went back and got a degree in geology and then worked as a hydrogeologist through my childhood and through my adolescence. I had this strong sense of my own personal obsession with going to the ocean, which so many of us have, but also I kind of understood the ocean as this much more complicated relationship between rivers and ecosystems that my mom was involved in trying to repair. And at the same time that I was experiencing both of those things, I was also experiencing this essentially very watery disease that my family inherited, where we are constantly kind of drowning from within with this enormous amount of fluid that just isn't in the right places. The more that my mom would send me articles about eco-collapse and climate change and global warming, and the more my dad was sick and eventually passed away, and the more I lived with my own disease, it felt like all of those factors, the planetary cycles that were changing and my own body changing, were so interconnected at kind of a lyrical and rhyming space. I don't have a disease that's caused by environmental collapse. But like everybody, I have a disease that can be made worse by environmental collapse. The more that I thought about these connections, the more research I started to do, the more I realized that those kinds of rhymes were present in the scientific literature as well. That if you started to research the ways that animals in the ecosystem were affected by pollution, you started seeing things that were so similar to the way that my body or my father's body were experiencing disease. Even if it wasn't literal that we were connected to the ocean, it was such intense experience of oneness between our bodies and the world that it felt important to try to figure out how to go down those chains of connection to see where the rhymes would take me.
When did you first realize that you had to write this book? And how difficult was it?
I've been trying to write this book for 10 years, so it's been a while. I had a great job that started about a decade ago where I was writing for an online magazine, and they allowed me to write anything I wanted to about spirituality and ecological collapse. And what I found myself writing all the time were stories about my understanding of my illness, my understanding of my kid, my understanding of animals in a collapsing ecosystem. And I kind of thought there was a book in there somewhere, which was about when I got the title. I like to write two things at once. Usually I like being at work on a nonfiction book and a fiction book at the same time and kind of going back and forth. And I was also working on a record album. All of them felt like they were playing into each other. The more that I tried to crack the story of this book, the more I realized I was going to have to write deeply about my own illness, which I really did not want to do. In my family, the Caffall curse was something we tried to keep a secret. My family wasn't open about it, especially before the Affordable Care Act. We could be denied health insurance because of our illness. It was always a sense of real precarity to be people with a chronic illness that was incurable. And so trying to figure out how to get to a point where I was comfortable writing both about the ecosystem, which I felt absolutely fine writing about, to tell the part that was about my own family details and to figure out how to incorporate my family and be really honest about what our experience was and also be really gentle and careful with everyone's story. That took me another 5 years. How to do that with my mother and also my child, who I wanted to be able to have some say in how he was represented in the world. And so waiting until he was 18 and could really tell me what shouldn't be in book from his perspective was a really important part of the process.
So the writing of the book has a wonderful lyrical style. When did you first start thinking in that way?
I think I've always been really attracted to that kind of writing. It's the stuff that I was obsessed with reading when I was a kid. But I grew up in a household that was also full of artists. My parents were both in the film industry before I was born, and their community was a lot of musicians and a lot of artists. I was exposed to a lot of music. I was exposed to a lot of jazz as a kid. When I left college with a degree in English and creative writing, I realized that the stuff I was interested in scientifically and in terms of like literary analysis was very heady. I absolutely was in a place of analysis when I was writing after I left college. I didn't think that that was going to serve me as a writer, and it didn't feel true to my personality. So when I landed in Chicago after college was over, I decided that what was going to do the best for my development as a writer was to begin to write music, which I did for 10 years. I wrote multiple record albums, and I played and I sang, and I really leaned into the left head voice part of my writing style and started thinking more about poetry and song lyric as a way to communicate the kind of deeper truths of what I wanted to get at, what I was maybe afraid to say on the page. I was afraid to write about my illness, but I could write a song about it. And when I started to transition out of playing music as much because of my illness, I really couldn't shake it. And that was a part of my writing DNA by that point. And so repetition and lyricism just kind of kept showing up in the way that the language played itself out in the book. I often think of the chapters more as songs on a record album so that I could sequence them in the right way. I think about that as much as I think about the craft of writing apart from songwriting.
On Nature Revisited, we try to share the notion that we are nature. In the Mourner's Bestiary, you express that notion that we are nature so seamlessly and powerfully. Can you share an excerpt from the book that exemplifies that?
Absolutely. I would never be able to make myself into the person who could soothe my mother or keep her from guilt over the things she couldn't save. I would never be able to be well, not if she and I both wished I could be, delivered from the genetics of the Caffall curse and the history of my father and all my mother wanted to put behind her. I would never be the pristine sea teeming with fish, the clear river rolling into it, full of trout and salmon and nutrients and cold water. I would be something else. I would be an ocean that could be made whole, not immediately, but over time, with care and volunteers, with boring regulation and breakthrough science, with local leadership and indigenous collaboration, with understanding the full story and telling the whole truth, and with care and love especially.
Thank you. Your book is about broken vessels, yourself as well as the planet. How did you find hope from both of those broken vessels, and what does it look like?
Again, because I've been writing this for such a long time, I feel like I've watched cycles of conversation about hope happen in the activist communities that I'm connected to, trying to tell people that they need to retain a lot of hope, to being really allergic to that word, to people, again, rediscovering the complexity and the muscularity of hope. Because I grew up in a family of chronically ill people, because I was diagnosed at a very young age, I have been having to redefine my own relationship to hope in my own future. And it's the future of the child that I wanted to have constantly for about 30 years with my diagnosis. My family provided a really great example of why holding on to the possibility of survival and the hope of that is kind of the most important thing to me to teach my kid, to teach my students, because my family kept going, right? We kept having new generations, and each generation had access to exponentially more medical understanding of our illness than the last generation. So that we went from, my great-great-grandfather dying without even understanding what his disease was, to my grandfather dying in a hospital when across town there was an experimental dialysis machine, to my dad having 2 kidney transplants. To me, I'm not in kidney failure and I'm in my 50s, which is unusual to say the least. And the reason for that is my excellent medical care. Being able to look generationally at that trajectory made me feel a sense of not just sort of a blind optimism. There are lots of people who are working on my illness at all times, who are head down in laboratories trying to cure this, trying to heal it. And I started to see the parallels between that and all of the scientists and activists that I knew, the ones I grew up with, the ones that I've gotten connected to through my work, who are absolutely trying to hold on until the next possible shift of culture, shift of legislation, shift of understanding that makes it possible to heal ecosystems. And I've seen that happen in the ecosystem that I write about, which is the Long Island Sound, where in 1987, the sound was extirpated of most of its life, almost completely eradicated. And now, in the last few years, we've actually had health return enough to the ecosystem that whales have started to return to that almost destroyed estuary oceanscape. I think there's lots of examples of that. And when we lose hope, we stop fighting for the possibility that the lives that are caught in these big forces matter. To me, that's the most important thing to hold on to, is that the more we fight, the more we work, the more we hold on, the more complex possibilities reveal themselves.
Most people will ask you, what do you want the reader to take away from the book? I want to know what you took away for yourself from writing this book.
I started this book where a lot of my readers are going to start, which is I didn't spend a lot of time with people who were doing this work. I had been a musician for a long time. I certainly spent time around people who are worried about these circumstances. But spending a decade hanging out with climate journalists and whale researchers and zoologists and other scientists trying to look at this story, this material, this information, what I've taken away from is that I am so energized and excited by the people who are throwing themselves into solutions, who are trying to tell these stories. I say this a lot, that one of the things you learn when you spend a lot of time with a climate journalist is that you would think you would go into the rooms that they were in and it would just be such a bummer. You'd be around people who were afraid all the time or really living in the pain of knowing the fact about what's happening to our planet. But actually, they're some of the most joyful, funny, irreverent, delightful people to spend time with. And I found the same thing about scientists. And it's because they've had the strength to look at something that really frightened them, that really made them lose sleep at night. And they've come away from it feeling just an enormous amount of connection to the people who are fighting so hard to prevent the worst from happening. That's really what I have taken away from this process, is that whenever you're feeling terrified by something, whether it's your own mortality or eco-collapse or climate change or global warming, that what you need to do for yourself to be able to get to the place where you can sleep at night again is allow yourself to look at the things that you're afraid of and then allow yourself to look at the people who are working to reverse them. Because those people are everywhere and they are working really hard and they are just so workaday about it. It's the job, it's the work. And the more that we all roll up our sleeves and feel that sense of oh, we're in this together, the better off we are. The isolation of fear, of mourning, of grieving, that's something we can put away. We don't have to be isolated in it. We can go to the collective where there's just an enormous amount of energy if waiting for it to happen to do this work.
So you now live in Chicago. How much do you miss the New England coastline, the Gulf of Maine, and the ocean?
I miss it constantly. We try to get back in the summer, both because I was doing research on the Gulf of Maine, but also because I feel like if I haven't touched the Atlantic Ocean once a year, I start to slowly shrivel up in size. I will say that living on the Great Lakes is an enormous comfort if you miss the ocean, because it is an incredible ecosystem on its own. I get to the lake as often as I can. For about a decade of living here, I lived 2 or 3 blocks from a beach. And it's a very different ecosystem, but it's just rich and gorgeous and incredible. And when you're having that need for the long vista where you can't see the other side of the water, if you live in Chicago, you have a remedy for it. If I can't get back to where the sea smells like the sea and I can see ocean creatures, just even talking to my friends around the East Coast and clicking into the seasonal change and what it must look like in the place that's my home place is just a moment of just longing until I get back as often as I can.
We all love to find things from the ocean as we walk along the beach. So when you found jingle shells or Atlantic slipper shells, or you watched the humpback whales, what do you think the ocean was trying to share with you?
What I find so inspiring and beautiful about those moments where you're beachcombing or you're walking along and you suddenly see a hermit crab or a horseshoe crab or a glimpse of the jellyfish that somebody's caught in a bucket. I feel like the message I always take away from that is that you are just one piece of an incredible level of biodiversity on this planet that we all get to share in and enjoy. Funny, I was teaching this summer on a prairie remnant in Illinois here, and I spend a lot of time hiking. My co-teacher said to me over dinner one night, "Did you realize that you say hello to every living creature that you see?" I hadn't realized I was doing it. And I think that the habit I've picked up from a lifetime of being so close to all of these animals. I'm on the record as I'd rather talk about fish than almost anything else. I feel like I'm getting a little glimpse into my neighbors and my kin and the incredible complexity of what you can connect with if you just go out your back door into whatever ecosystem that you're in to participate. I'm just a being like that horseshoe crab, and getting to see them or getting to see the whale that I've been privileged to see in these ecosystems. It's just a little moment of being able to like wave at your neighbor and remember we're all part of the same big web.
We were whole once, we all thought we'd last. We were whole once, and we went so fast. We were whole once, we all thought we'd last. We were whole once, and we went so fast. There was something that day on the beach, a bit of a life out of reach. The moment the clouds gathered weight, you could see that it must be too late. Can I just say that I didn't invent the story I'm telling you now? We were whole once, we all thought we'd last. We were whole once, but we went so fast.
Eiren, before we go, I would like to ask a few questions about life away from the book. How is your son, Dex? Because he plays a very big part in the book.
Yeah, he does. He does. And I tried very hard to write the book without him in it because I didn't want to have his story out when it wasn't him telling it. But it's such a generational story. And I think for me, I take an enormous amount of optimism from the way that he's living his life and the way that he's emerging into the world as the last of the line of Caffalls. He's the only one in that generation. And I just think his life is beautiful and full of optimism. Still completely obsessed with the ocean. Got to go out on a sea voyage on a tall ship a couple of summers ago, which was really life-changing. Doing really well.
So you say you still write and perform music. How can someone find out more about that?
My last record, which is called Slipping the Holdfast, is available anywhere you can get your music. Bandcamp, where you can also buy a vinyl version. It was very important to me to have an analog option for people. I'm in the process of getting ready to record another record, which I'm really excited about. And I play live every once in a while in Chicago. So if you live here and follow me on social media, I usually announce those with plenty of time to come and see me play live.
And can you tell us a little bit about the novel that you have coming out called All the Water in the World?
As I mentioned, I like to have 2 projects going at once, one fiction and one nonfiction. Actually 3 if you count having a record somewhere in the background. So this book was being written essentially at the same time as the memoir. And it is a literary thriller. The story is about a family of scientists that are living on the roof of the American Museum of Natural History in New York in a post-climate collapse world. And they've stayed behind in an empty city to try and protect the collections and retain the knowledge of the museum until a huge storm comes and destroys their settlement, floods the city, and they have to take off in a birch bark canoe up the Hudson River, try and find safety. It is a thriller. It's got a lot of energy, but it's also very much like the memoir. It's a meditation on what we save and why we save what we do and who is safe and who is vulnerable and why community and supporting each other and surviving matters more than anything under any kind of series of losses. I'm in love with book books because they're both at the heart about little families trying to figure out how to survive in a period of great upheaval and loss.
I hope you enjoyed our time with Eiren Caffall and that you get the opportunity to read this wonderful memoir, The Mourner's Bestiary. You can learn more about the other interests in Eiren's life, her fiction, and her music at eirencaffall.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please share with friends, family, and colleagues. And please rate us on your favorite podcast server. It will help us to reach a larger audience. You can follow Nature Revisited on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or our website, nordenproductions.com. I would also like to invite you to share your comments and ideas and even suggestions for future guests for Nature Revisited on the comment section of this episode on our website. The music for Nature Revisited is Tim Buckley, Buzz and Fly. Nature Revisited is produced by Stefan Van Norden and Charles Gagan. And I hope you will join me for the next edition of Nature Revisited. And in the meantime, remember, we are nature.